Welcome to the Profile Corner. In today's video, I thought I would give you an overview of the changes that I made to these otherwise stock Delta or Delta Rockwell bandsaws that I have here. In the back here, I have a 1946 Delta Milwaukee 14-inch bandsaw. It originally had a height capacity of up to about 6.5 inches, or maybe a little bit less than that. And then I've got here a Rockwell or Delta Rockwell 14-inch bandsaw. And this was produced in either the late 1970s or the early 1980s from what I can tell from the design of it. This has a rounded shank here, and yet the socket up here is actually a hexagon shape to it. Even though this shaft here is round with a flat on this side, whereas on this older bandsaw back here, this is actually a hexagon shaped shaft, and of course the socket up here is also hexagon shaped. And there's also some other minor differences in terms of the older bandsaw and the newer bandsaw, and you can see how they've tried to reduce the cost of manufacturing even between 1946 and the late 1970s or early 80s. And then of course they tried to further reduce the cost of manufacturing as the years went on before the Delta 14-inch bandsaw went off the market. Shortly before they went off the market, I believe that Delta switched over to having the 14-inch bandsaws produced in China, whereas up until that point they'd all been produced in the United States. And in the case of this one, it was actually produced in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I don't recall where this one was produced. I believe that Delta relocated in between 1946 and when this bandsaw was produced. So let's take a quick look at all the upgrades that I made to these two saws. I made almost all these upgrades 2 years ago, except for a handful of items that I did earlier in the years. Okay, so I've got a list here that I'll be reading off just so that I don't miss anything. I'll be showing you close-up video of what I'm talking about, just so that you can actually see it on the machines. So back here, I have what's called a link belt mounted onto the pulleys of the saw, and this is intended to reduce the amount of vibration. This is a Fenner Drives brand, which was made in the United States. It's one of the few brands that is made in the United States, and I believe that Fenner Drive was the original manufacturer of link belts. And so I found that that helps to reduce the amount of vibration. And I believe I actually installed this link belt probably about 22 years ago, maybe even longer than that. And it's been working out real well on this saw. Years ago, probably back in the early 1990s, when I got this saw, it had a 1/3 horsepower motor in it. And I thought that that was way too low. And I went through the classified ads, and I found that some person was selling a 1 horsepower Craftsman motor for a saw or some other type of equipment. Unfortunately, that motor travels at twice the speed, so it travels at 3450 RPM instead of 1725. And so what that means is that this saw actually runs twice as fast as it was originally intended to run in terms of blade inches per second. And that hasn't seemed to have caused any kinds of problems, and it does speed up the cutting process quite a bit. So I've just kind of left it as it is. I've added in a riser kit. It's a 6-inch riser kit, which extends the height of the amount that can be cut from about 6 inches up to about 12 inches. And it also changes the required blade length from 93.5 inches to 105 inches. And so that required me to buy some new blades for the saw when I put on the upgrade kit. The seller was on eBay. The store name was Vintage Delta Rockwell Parts, and the seller name was PD2 Bob. I just checked out on eBay and I didn't see any of these riser kits. I believe I paid right around $200 for this riser kit, plus a bit of money for shipping. I don't recall what the shipping cost was, but it was not cheap. So it is kind of an expensive upgrade. I don't think that I'll ever be cutting or resawing a board that's 12 inches tall. However, if I need to do some bandsaw cuts on a part that's already partially assembled, now I have additional height here that I could put the part into if I'm going to be cutting down low or something like that. And so that works out real well, I believe. Also, these bandsaws were known for not having a lot of resistance to kind of moving when a lot of tension is put onto them with the tensioning mechanisms. And so apparently it gets a little bit worse with the 12-inch height capacity. I haven't had any problems with this, but then this older saw is built a little more robustly than the newer saws that might have that flexing problem. Okay, so years ago, I replaced the steel guide blocks that are on either side of the blade with what are called cool blocks, and I believe that those were manufactured by Olson. I still have the cool blocks on the bottom side down here. However, I replaced the cool blocks that were up here on the top a couple years ago with ball bearing guides. I believe that these were made by a small company in Michigan, maybe up by Muskegon, Michigan, or something like that. They're sold by a company named Howardraytool. I believe that that company has been around since 2021, or they were reorganized potentially in that year, and maybe they were around before then. I went out onto their eBay site. I did not see any of these guides for the Delta 14-inch bandsaw being available right now, but I believe that on their website they did say that you could request other particular guides. They did have guides out there for the 14-inch Powermatic and Craftsman saws. I'm not real certain that this is a super high quality blade guide with ball bearings on it. The cool blocks probably did just about as good of a job, I think. Now, this did come with 2 sets of bearings. However, if you're only running a 1/2 inch or narrower blade, you're only supposed to have one of these bearings installed on each side. If you're running a 3/4 inch blade, then you could stack up the 2 bearings together. And so that was kind of just a little bit odd to me. But that's the way this one works out. And of course it's got another bearing here in the back. And instead of the bearing running in this direction around, it actually has the bearing running this way around. And that may or may not be a little more efficient than the original Delta design. Okay, so this table apparently went quite a few years without having a pin installed into the front here. This pin is supposed to make sure that this side of the table stays aligned with this side of the table, and it went at least 30 years or probably even 35 years without having a pin in there, and it had no difficulty. But I did find that vintage Delta Rockwell parts seller, which is PD2 Bob on eBay, had one of these in stock along with several other old parts, and so I purchased one when I found one on his eBay listings. I don't know if he still has any out there. Of course, there's probably other eBay sellers that have these now. I bought a Kreg KMS 7200 rip fence, and I was a little bit disappointed with this rip fence because they sent it out with bolts that could not be installed. I actually had to grind the head of those bolts to actually insert them into the slots, and so that was problematic, at least from my perspective, that a seller such as Kreg would send out products that a person has to modify in order to actually put those parts together. It was actually the a head stamping, certain letters or something like that, that the bolt manufacturer added onto the head of the bolts that I had to grind off. And so that was rather disappointing. And that's not the first time that Kreg has let me down. So these are probably going to be the last time that I purchase anything from Kreg. At least as far as I can see going forward. So I don't like being disappointed like that. I've also have in here a Timberwolf 3/16 inch blade installed. This blade is 105 inches long, and I've got this blade mounted so that the back of the gullet of the blade is actually centered on the wheels up here. And I learned that from a magazine many years ago, and I happened to watch a video by Alex Snodgrass called Bandsaw Clinic, and that was an excellent video, and that was one of the things that he had mentioned in his video, is that you want to have the back of the gullet of the blade exactly in the center of the wheels so that you don't get any kind of drifting. I made that change quite a few years ago, and the problem went away with the drifting that I had on here when I was trying to use a rip fence. I had created a custom rip fence many years ago, and that never worked for me up until the point when I tried to run the blade with the gullet in the center up here. And I happened to see that once again in Alex Snodgrass's video, and I went through his entire video as well as a couple other videos he created, and I took the table off of this saw and I got everything aligned nice, and it seems to be working out great. So you may want to check out that Alex Snodgrass video. It was created probably about 13 years ago. If you're having difficulty with your bandsaw, with it not tracking straight, or not cutting straight, or anything else like that, you'll probably be very happy with the results once you go through the process. I had a problem with the wheels. There's actually rubber tires that go onto the wheels, and one of the wheels, the top one up here, it actually developed a bump in it over the last 30 some odd years, and I was ignoring it the best I could. I'd actually replaced that rubber tire probably back in 1992, and I thought that it was finally time to replace it. And so I went with urethane tires by Sulphur Group Tool, and those are sold through Amazon, and that seems to be working out real well. Now, those urethane tires, you'll probably see videos and whatnot on the internet saying that you're supposed to soak those in hot water to get them loose, and that way it's easier to stretch them onto the tire. Well, the manufacturer actually said do not do that. That what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to take them and stretch them out over the corner of a workbench, and then once you've done that, what you can do is you can use 2 Phillips head screwdrivers and 3 spring clamps, and use the 2 Phillips head screwdrivers to start wedging it onto the wheel, and then once you get it wedged onto the wheel in one spot, you put a spring clamp on, and then you move up further and you wedge it onto the wheel there, put on another spring clamp, go up further, and you wedge it onto the wheel, then you put on another spring clamp, and you keep on going around. Once you get over to this side, you can probably take one of the spring clamps off over here and relocate it over here. So I just bought some cheap 1-inch steel spring clamps from the Orange big box store, and I used those. I actually bought 4 of those, and so I had extras in case I needed them. Anyway, it went on real easy, and then I just did the same thing for the bottom wheel, and so that worked out real nice. And another thing is that when you've used the bandsaw and you're done using it for the day, what you want to do is you want to remove the tension from the blade, so that way you're not leaving a lot of tension on the rubber wheel or the urethane wheel that's going around, and also the blade's not getting quite so much of a set in it because it's not under a lot of tension. And these old bandsaws, it was really hard to take the tension off and put it back on because there was a knob on the back side here, and there was a little tiny cutout on the back side that you're supposed to be able to reach your fingers into and turn the knob. Well, that got to be old hat after quite a few years, and so I actually took that off, and I found on the internet that a company named Iturra Design is selling a spinner bandsaw tension crank. Unfortunately, they do not have any kind of a presence on the internet, and so they don't have any kind of web store or anything like that. It seems really odd in this day and age that they don't have that, but I did find that Highland Woodworking carries this spinner, and I installed it on this saw, and now all that I've got to do to put the tension on is I just turn this wheel up here 3 times clockwise, and now I've got the proper tension down here. And when I get done for the day, I just spin it counterclockwise 3 times, and now the tension's been released again. I did find that if you leave the tension on accidentally, and then you spin it another 3 times to turn on the tension, the blade doesn't like that so much, and the blade will actually hop off and run forward, and then it ends up gouging up the teeth. And so the teeth on this blade are not very sharp right now, so I'll probably have to replace this blade. It's still sharp enough to cut you if you rubbed your fingers across it, but so that's a little problem. So you may want to have some sort of a sign that you put up here saying that you removed the tension after you've done that, and you've got this type of a wheel for releasing the tension. Okay, so that's about it for the upgrades on this old 1946 saw. Now we'll take our attention over to this Rockwell Delta bandsaw, and we'll look at the upgrades that I did on this. Okay, once again, I have a Fenner Drives Link Belt installed, and I've actually installed that type of link belt on several of my tools, only using the Fenner Drives brand. That's a good US made brand for these link belts. I believe that they were the original creator of the link belts, and so I've stuck with them. With the Chinese made ones that you can find on Amazon, you may end up having quite a few difficulties with those, such as them stretching out quite a bit or actually coming apart. And so that may be something that you'd want to avoid. Okay, so I could not get a Carter Products ball bearing guide for this old bandsaw with a hex-shaped bar that goes up and down, but I did find that those were sold through Amazon. It's called the Carter Products Del 14, DEL 14 ball bearing guide, and that's sold through Amazon, and they do have it for the style that has a round and a flat. And so if you've got one of those, you can use the Carter guides, and here you can see that you can leave both of those bearings in place at all times, even when you're running the narrower blades. I've got a 3/8 inch wide blade mounted on here from Olson Saw, and that seems to be working out pretty well, and it's handy to have 2 different bandsaws so that you can have them set up in different ways at different times. So this would be better for the straight cuts, and the other saw back here, because it's got the narrower blade, that would be better for the scrolling cuts. Or I can put a 1/2 inch wide resaw blade on here and use it for resawing. Either way. This also has a Kreg KMS 7200 rip fence that was sold through Amazon. And oddly enough, when I ordered the 2 rip fences, the second one got lost by Amazon in their shipping. And so I actually had to order a 3rd one from Amazon so that I could get the 2. I did get a refund on the second one that got lost, so that worked out pretty well. This Olson blade, just like the blade in the other bandsaw back there, is running centered on the wheel up here. Not just centered, but the back of the gullet is centered on the wheel. And once again, I have urethane tires installed on this bandsaw from Sulphur Tool. That's a company that's based in the United States, and so they were actually manufactured in the United States. and they're sold through Amazon. So that worked out real well for me. I haven't had any issues with it other than trying to remember if I've actually released the tension the previous time I got done using the saw or not. And so once again, you may want to have some sort of a sign that you hang on to it saying that you've actually released the tension if you get one of these. And so I've got this Iturra design spinner also mounted onto this saw, just like I have onto the other saw. Okay, so that's about it for the upgrades of these saws. I'm sure that I'm forgetting something. That's all for today. Thanks for watching. Bye.